Harassed for months, Gerald Not in My Tits spent his days in paralysing fear of one man, a short, bespectacled gentleman who went by the local nickname of Barry the Tea Leaf Reader. Gerald tells us the story.
I like tea, you know. I wouldn't say I was a connoisseur or nothing. I mean, I never bathed with a giant snake and some let's say souchong while Ernest Brillo played a trombone full of pudding or anything. But, you know, I had the odd cuppa.
I understand. Please continue.
Well, one day I was round this old bird's house, not an actual bird, you understand, an old lady. Although she did have a cockatiel who could peck out the bells of St. Swithin's on a balalaika. And anyway, she had this tea, and it wasn't normal, right? Well, it wasn't in a bag or nothing. She put it in this little straining device. It was like loose, you know. It was a bit like a Venus flytrap looking thing, this thing was. Reminded me the aliens used to come down and anally probe the tan simpleton, Nigel.
We'll get back to that, but carry on.
Well, it was delightful, tasty, lovely, best cup of tea I'd ever had. If only the lady was still alive, I'd have asked her what it was, and if I could have some. Instead, I heaved her corpse into the hole I dug in her back garden, made a few phone calls to solidify my alibi, and immediately went into town to find out what this magic out-of-a-bag tea was. Well, I'd no sooner done shoving addict down my trousers and asking some questions at a local supermarket, and then he appeared.
Barry?
Yeah, that's right. Barry. On me like a fly on white rice, he was.
Yeah, that's not correct, but I'll allow it.
He kept asking me if he could read my tea leaves. Now, I've heard of people getting healthy from licking badgers or winning money by working hard for 45 hours a week at something they call a job. But I've never heard of no reading tea leaves. No sooner had I purchased a patch of loose Earl Grey, and I instantly wished I'd gone for the old bags of Yorkshire Gold and had been done with it. The next few months became a living hell.
OK, Gerald, let's leave that there because it's time for us to ask the studio audience.
OK, so, studio audience, do you think, A, all matter in the universe is relative and really time is infinite and there's nothing after death but more cheese and onion crisps? B, the butler did it with Mrs. Plums in the conservatory with a feather duster and the heavily thumbed copy of What Botty Monthly? Or C, the after-movie diner.
Welcome to yet another episode of the After Movie Diner, and this is a real thrill for us. We have got the infamous and famous Massachusetts comedian extraordinaire, all the way down from Massachusetts, came into New York last night. I've been on his podcast, so you should know him by now, and you should all be listening to Hold the Mayo podcast. It's the one, the only, the effervescent Jay Mayo.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I don't know if I'm going to live up to the hype, but I'll certainly try.
It's fantastic to have you here, son. I can't believe you came all the way down from Massachusetts, but you did do some live comedy. That was the intention, right?
Yeah, I did. I came down to do some stand-up dates, and while I was down here, why not come and hang out and do the After Movie Diner?
Well, we had planned, after we had done the show together, your show together, to do an episode on the two movies that we're going to cover. And then I went on hiatus for a couple of months because I had this new job, and then when I came back to it, I was like, well, I've had this stipulation. It has to be done live in a diner.
That's right.
Which kind of means that, you know, I'll have to grab the episodes when I can. And so when you said you were coming down, I was like, okay, well, we'll do it live in a diner then. It's as good as anything, right? So
it all sort of worked out?
It worked out perfectly well.
So,
yeah, I'm going to have a black and white shake, please.
Welcome back, mate.
Hey!
There you go.
How are you
You're the
doing?
corner guy right there, eh?
Sorry?
You're the corner guy.
I am, yeah. No, I'm weirdly enough, I'm going to be back working at the Javits this coming weekend, so we will send people down.
See you.
Of course, sir, of course.
iced tea?
Yeah.
They always remember me here.
Well, that's always a good thing, right?
Oh, it's an amazing thing. And they're the loveliest people as well. I'm definitely going to go for a big breakfast. I've just decided.
Okay.
I'm going to go for the big lumberjack breakfast. I want lumberjack with French toast. Because I am starving, my friend. I am starving. So, the two films that we've decided to cover this week on the show, I have to occasionally remind myself we're doing the show. I like to keep things casual and informal, but obviously the discussion over breakfast today in the Market Diner on 43rd Street and 11th Avenue will be all about John Carpenter's TV film Elvis, and your favorite film of all time, sir, which is?
La Bamba.
La Bamba, the two rock biopics from the 50s, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And both looking at the early years. Obviously, Richie Valens only had early years.
Very true.
But Elvis is sort of, it only goes up to the comeback special.
Yeah, it only goes to 1976.
Right.
Technically.
But they don't go over the kind of taking lots of pills and all that kind of stuff.
No. There's
the framing device is the comeback special, just like in Walk the Line, the framing device is Folsom Prison.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a great general overview of Elvis's life, but they don't really go into too much detail, and then there's really no ending to the movie.
Right. It just kind of ends.
It just sort of fades out.
It was interesting. Anyway, we'll get into it. But they're the two movies that we're talking about, both rock biopics. And so, which should we start with? Should we start with La Bamba, or or do you want to leave your favorite till the end?
Oh, let's leave La Bamba to the end. I feel like you're going to have to cut me off at some point.
Thank you, sir. Okay. You know what you want yet, Jay?
Go.
All right. I'm just looking at yeah, here we go. French toast. I want French toast, bacon, sausage, scrambled eggs. Boom. That's what I want. That's what I'm going to get. So, cheers.
And to you as well.
Nice. Black and white milkshake. Always welcome. It is my milkshake of choice.
Is this your diner of choice?
Yeah, I mean, if I could move this closer to town, this is my favorite diner.
Yeah. It's pretty nice so far.
I love it.
Yeah, I don't...
I mean, it's by a construction site and across the road from the UPS building, but...
Well, I mean, you can't have everything, right? You can't
But it's
have
a
the
wonderful
scenery.
big corner lot. It's been around since the 50s. Closed down once, reopened. But it's an authentic. This is an authentic original New York 50s diner. It's been around a while.
I like it. I like it a lot, actually.
Yeah. And it looks like it was decorated in the 70s and then they never bothered to change it.
I mean, when you have great
Orange and brown.
When you have wonderful orange upholstery, why change that?
Never change wonderful orange upholstery. The funny thing is I remember moving into a house with my mum after my parents split, and it was a house that had been built in the 70s, and inside the cupboard, in the kitchen, because they had a built-in larder cupboard kind of thing, pantry, I guess you guys would call it, opened it up. The inside was still wallpapered with the orange, green, and brown 70s paisley wallpaper that they must have had over the whole house back in the day.
Right.
And that was amazing. I loved that. After you, Jay?
I'm going to have Monte Cristo.
Good choice, sir. Good choice. I'm going to have French toast with bacon, sausage, and scrambled eggs, please.
Du fish and chips, fish and chips subsidy.
I like a good, honest waiter.
Oh yeah, this man's he's the greatest. He's the greatest. When I was working at the Javits last year as a temp, doing a lot of conventions, I would come in here some lunchtimes and we would hang out and talk. And I'd tip well, so he remembers me.
Sure. As well he should.
Of course. And then one night I came in here, I don't know when this was, about 5-6 months ago. I came in here one night, and one of the waiters working the night, he went, "Ooh," like that. And I didn't necessarily recognize him, but I was like, okay, he must have me. And he gave me like a big hug.
Well, that's strange.
And I was like, no, but in a nice way, like in a, hey man, like a big hug. And I'm like, this must be my place. Like I must be home. This must be where I'm meant to be.
Yeah, I suppose you're right.
You know what I mean? Waiters don't hug everybody. You know what I mean?
I would hope not.
No.
This is a very strange diner if that's their policy.
We have a no hug policy except for John Cross. When he comes in, we hug him. Elvis, John Carpenter. So obviously I'm a big John Carpenter fan, big Kurt Russell fan. So, and I'd seen this once before. But I have to say, I didn't remember like just how kind of slow and relatively uninteresting it is.
Right.
I mean, it's like trying to take the greatest hits or the stylized, overly simplified, woefully inaccurate greatest hits of sort of Elvis's early life, and done very well, but clearly constrained within a TV budget.
Right. I think I'm a huge Elvis man. Everybody knows that about me. There's no mistaking that I'm a huge Elvis.
I've done the Elvis hair for you, the small one, the 50s greaser hair for you.
I love it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have Elvis sideburns. I love Elvis. Everybody knows that.
That's the great thing. He is the king.
He is the king. I've seen probably a dozen Elvis movies. You know, whether it's a biopic or whether it's a documentary style or whatever. This particular movie I had not seen, I think because it was a made-for-TV movie. It wasn't, your regular...
And it's like 3 hours long. It's quite...
Right.
I would imagine they showed it over 2 or 3 nights or something. I would imagine.
They had to have. There's no way anyone would be able to just sit down in front of their television and watch this start to finish and stay completely interested the whole time. I highly doubt that.
And I think it was probably more palatable in 3 parts.
Oh, probably.
As a miniseries.
Probably.
Because I did sit down and watch this whole thing in 3 hours.
As did I.
Yeah.
As did I. So it was. I actually didn't even know about the movie, so I was glad that you brought it up. It's one more movie in the Elvis universe that I didn't know about, but I'm glad that I was able to experience it.
And also, weirdly, being a big movie fan, to me, it's like when everyone talks about Elvis movies, it's like the one you should see. It's the one that everyone talks about because it's Carpenter and Russell is the reason to watch this. I mean, he is the whole reason to watch it.
I will absolutely agree with that. Of all the people that have done Elvis impersonations, and I say Elvis impersonations, and I don't say that they played Elvis as a character, because there's no way for anyone to take themselves and make themselves an Elvis character. You have to play Elvis.
Right.
There's no way to put a little bit of yourself into it.
No.
You have to. He's too specific of a person and an entity for you to make it your own.
And everyone knows the bits about it. They know that he did karate. They know that they know stuff. They know the big jumpsuits. They know the flamboyant thing. They know the Memphis Mafia. They know Priscilla.
Right.
Lisa Marie. Like all these things are very well known to people. So
right. But I think out of all the people that have played Elvis or impersonated Elvis, I think that Kurt Russell did a great job with it. It was a little bit difficult to believe that he was both 18 and then 42 years old.
Right.
That they didn't really transition him.
They don't
from
age
young,
him at all.
Yeah,
No.
from young to old. I mean, there's a lot of things about the movie that I did like, and there was tons of things that I didn't like about the movie. But as a whole, I really enjoyed it because I had no idea that it even existed. So just being able to watch it and just being able to see a different spin on things and just to get a little bit more Elvis in my life, I enjoyed it just for that.
Right, and I think I'm right in saying, in fact, I can't look it up. I think I'm right in saying that this comes after Halloween. So I think John Carpenter does Dark Star, Assault on Precinct 13, Halloween, and then this.
Right.
So it's like kind of, because he also does Someone Is Watching Over Me, which was a TV horror movie that he made with Lauren Hutton. I've got a feeling that might be around that time as well. So, unfortunately, I don't know enough about that era of Carpenter's life to know why he suddenly did TV after having what was 3 really successful movies and winning an Oscar for his university short film that he did, The Life and Times of Billy Bronco or whatever it's called, something like that. Won a short film Oscar, which to this day he's not allowed to have because it was done for the University of California, and USC keep any awards because they own, if you make a movie on their campus or with their money or with their camera, they own that movie.
Right. Well, I suppose that makes sense business-wise. It seems shitty.
Yeah, because Carpenter directed it.
Sure.
He's an Oscar-winning director, technically. Anyway, sorry, Karen.
I'm not a John Carpenter historian by any stretch of the imagination. What I can say is that I know that some of the Memphis Mafia were producers on the movie.
Right.
So I think it was heavily influenced by those guys on, exactly what was said and what was done.
And it's fairly early on, because it's late 70s,
It's
right?
1979.
Right.
So it wasn't that far off.
Right,
it was
when
only
he died.
two years removed from, Elvis being being alive, I guess.
Right.
So,
Do you think he's still alive? Is that
no.
I don't know if you were an Elvis conspiracy nut.
I would like to be.
He's wandering our aisleways at Walmart, picking out bunny slippers.
I would like to be an Elvis conspiracy theorist. I will say Elvis has a second cousin that is probably as crazy could be, and he himself is convinced that Elvis is still alive. I watched a documentary on the life and death of Elvis, and he's got a second cousin. If you were to think about the heaviest Southern accent you can imagine,
Right.
this gentleman has that beat by a long shot.
Nice.
And I don't mean to.
Did they have to subtitle him?
Yeah, I don't mean to make it seem like he's dumb because he's got such a thick accent. But that's what you think.
Right.
I mean, that's what you think when you.
Listen,
when you hear
we're the Northeast Coast elite. We should own it and move on.
Right. Well, as someone from Boston, it's hard for me to hear someone with such a thick Southern accent and hear the things that this guy was saying,
right,
and take him seriously.
Right.
But yeah, he's very convinced that Elvis is still alive, or at least at the time of them making this movie, he was still convinced that he was alive.
Oh, is this the documentary that was on the... Oh, we're recording a podcast. No. We want you on it. It's all about the ambience and everything else.
And the cereal,
Yeah. And we'll mention you and everything else. It's all good. And I love to see they played it up separately because that's how it should be served.
That's true.
So that I can have this as a dessert. Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
So yeah, Elvis has had a second cousin.
Right.
Who is?
Because I didn't watch any of the extras. I maybe should have done.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't on the extras for John Carpenter's Elvis.
Oh, okay.
This is a whole separate movie. But yeah, he even has family members that are conspiracy theorists about him.
Right.
Which seems strange. It seems strange.
Listen, I mean, the one thing that this movie does more than most is it talks about the dichotomy of the fact that Elvis just wanted to be on stage, but at the same time really hated the limelight.
Well, I think that was the most interesting part of the movie.
And not only hated the limelight, but also thought he was maybe going to get assassinated. Was sort of paranoid about JFK and...
Oh yeah, he was paranoid about JFK, and he was also... He almost had weird premonitions of what was going to happen to him in his own life, but it also sort of bounced back and forth between like dreams his mother was having about him,
right,
and then these weird premonitions that he was having, whether they were subconscious or during his dreams or what have you. That also kind of struck me. I have heard that Elvis had dreams like that, like he really did have dreams that someone was going to assassinate him, or
right,
that this was going to happen in his career, what have you. Of course, none of these things have ever been proven.
Right.
I guess that's the terrible part of when someone does pass. There's no way to prove any of these things nowadays.
Well, the crazy thing is whether they were narcissistic or whether they understood their place in history. Someone like the Beatles would film themselves all the time. I mean, they were filmed anyway by sort of news agencies. But then even when he lived in Tinhurst and was basically a recluse when he lived in New York and took his 5 years off, John Lennon filmed himself all the time. So like when he died, they were able to put together that documentary using so much footage of his life so that if he was having dreams or troubles or anything like that, you kind of knew about it because it was like a diary of his life going on.
Right.
Elvis never really wrote anything down or recorded himself in that way, right?
No, he didn't. And I think the thing with Elvis is that, especially depicted in this particular movie, is that he wanted to be a regular person.
Right.
It got to the point where he literally couldn't leave his house. He was too famous. Everybody was trying to take pictures of him. He's just a poor guy from Memphis.
Right.
From, a very modest means and kind of just thrust into the limelight. So, for a guy like that, how would you expect to just all of a sudden one day just become like the biggest star in the world and have everybody wanting to, tear your doors down and want a piece of you?
Right.
So I like that they depicted him as a regular person, a normal guy, a family guy. Most of the movies that you see about Elvis, especially the documentaries, they say nothing about him wanting to be a family man and wanting to be a normal person and
right,
wanting to have the regular things in life that most people experience.
And that sort of rang true because, I mean, yes, obviously he has conflicts with Priscilla, over, you know, and over the touring and over the whatever. And obviously, you know, he did get into prescription drugs and all sorts of other stuff. But he never struck me as like a bad person, like a horrible person. He always struck me as a very kind of, you know, mild, regular kind of guy with this like insanely flamboyant side, because I guess it was either the thing of like when someone who's raised poor gets money, they kind of go overboard with it and they start, well, or it's like he wanted those two personas. He wanted the regular like jeans Elvis behind closed doors, but then when he was out in public he wanted the capes and the jumpsuits and the big sequin shirts and all the rest of it, right?
I mean, I guess either way, I guess I can't blame Elvis or anyone that's depicting Elvis one way or another. Whether they depict him as a family man or whether they depict him as a wild narcissist or whatever. I'm sure there's elements to all of those things that are completely true.
Well, there has to be.
I'll absolutely agree with that. However, I will say that the reason that I liked this movie is because of just that. Is because they depicted him as wanting to be a family man, having to be on stage to be able to facilitate the lifestyle that they were living, that they became accustomed to. But really, he wanted to be the same guy that he was when he was a kid. Like he wanted his family to be the same as, you know, his parents and him growing up.
Right.
Of course, they had a lot of money and, you know, notoriety, all that. However, he still wanted to call home all the time and just talk on the phone like he did with his mother when he was growing up, to his wife and to his child. So I like that aspect of it. They never really shine a light on that in any of the other Elvis movies. Except,
I would argue, Bubba Hotep. Because for everything that Bubba Hotep is, B-movie, schlocky, there's a mummy, all the rest of it, it's incredibly emotionally poignant, and I think says genuinely real things about Elvis and JFK to some extent. I think, like, I always get really into it. I think there's a certain point in Bubba Hotep where Bruce Campbell disappears and you are just watching old Elvis. I think it's that good a performance. And I think if there's two movies that are sort of reverential or sensitive to the Elvis legend without being overly sentimental or mawkish, it's these two films, Bubba Hotep and the John Carpenter Elvis. And we can't underestimate, obviously, the fact that Kurt Russell's father, Bing Russell, was an actor, so therefore he wasn't ever huge, but like they were aware of what it was like to have sort of be working class but then have money and da-da-da-da-da. And then obviously Kurt Russell was a child actor who had a lot of fame very early on, so would have known about that. And I think some of that plays into his performance, maybe.
I think a little bit. Well, I'll agree with that also. And I think that having your father play your father, there has to be some element of that where both of them were just so comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, obviously Kurt has a much bigger role than Bing does in the movie, obviously, playing Elvis. But there has to be like a comfortability factor that goes along with, had someone else played Vernon, he wouldn't have depicted the character the same exact way. When your father is actually playing your father in a movie, your real life father, you don't have to pretend anymore.
No.
So, you know, the apprehension and all that kind of stuff that comes along with, are we going to have chemistry? Is this going to work? Am I going to flub my lines because of the way he looked at me, or you know, the reaction that I get? All of that goes right out the window. So I think it's kind of genius.
Yeah.
You know, casting a real life father and son as a movie father and son.
And I think if there's any interest here for film fans and music fans, it's seeing those performances and seeing Carpenter do there's the odd bit here and there where you're like, that's a John Carpenter move, like just the way it's shot. Sure. It's still kind of pedestrian and TV and most of it, but there's just the occasional bit that elevates it and you're like, there's some Carpenter at work, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yes.
And also, let's not forget, Carpenter is a Southerner, raised during the height of Elvis's fame, and is a musician, had a musician father. So a lot of But they're the right guys for the job, is what I'm trying to say. For this,
Yeah, there was at no point did I think to myself, well, this person doesn't fit that role, or this seems out of place, or anything like that. It all seemed to kind of melt together the way that it should have.
Right.
As far as
it's just what they chose to
right. As far as what they chose to cover and what they chose to leave out.
Right.
All of that's subjective.
Right.
Me being an Elvis fan and researching Elvis and knowing all these trivial facts, of course I can sit here and point the finger and say, well, that's not exactly the way that happened, or, you know, they missed this, or whatever.
You mean he didn't get up in a German beer put and, like, sing rock songs
Sing Tutti Frutti? No, I don't.
With a bunch of, like, lederhosen wearing... Yeah, that didn't happen?
I don't think that happened. Again, I wasn't there, but I'm pretty sure that sort of thing didn't happen.
I'm willing that didn't happen.
I'm sure that Elvis played music while he was in Germany, and I'm sure that that's pretty much the only thing they had him doing while he was in Germany.
Right.
However, do I think that there was an impromptu dinner concert session going on where he sang Tutti Frutti, where the random people at his table just also happened to be musicians and happened to know that he wanted to play that? No, I don't think that probably worked out.
But that also happens in La Bamba, where his brother's like, oh, I'll play drums, and then his brother gets up and plays like me.
I will say that that's a little more believable. Is if they walk into a bar to play, and his brother says, I guess I'll just play drums, and he plays poorly. So at least that's believable. Yeah,
he holds the rhythm, but...
Barely. That's sort of believable.
Right, I guess so.
The spontaneous... musical number in the middle of dinner.
In the middle of like a polka, like a kind of German beer put, like polka place.
Right, it just seemed a little, that seemed a little far-fetched. But then again, I wasn't there, I don't know.
True. Plus, I'm sure whoever made this, NBC or whoever made it, well, like, we have to have a song every 5 minutes or whatever it is.
If you want to keep people's attention, you're doing a story about Elvis, there has to be him singing every few minutes. It can't all be prescription drugs and womenizing and all that kind
of stuff.
Which
it wasn't. There wasn't any of it.
It was. Well, I guess I'll say that is that it was a very safe movie.
Right.
Being that it was a TV movie, obviously, they couldn't push the boundaries in 1979. Movie of the week kind of deal. They couldn't make it too outlandish. Being on a network, so it was very safe.
Right. Now, have you been to Graceland?
I have not.
Wow.
I know. It's on the list.
Of course. No. That's going to be a huge thing. So, do you know if they were the real, like, gates and everything? Did they use any parts of the real area? Or
It appeared that the front gates were the real front gates. I don't believe very much of the interior was.
No. That would have been sets, I'd imagine.
Yeah. As far as like shots of the front of the house, I'm sure that was the actual front of Graceland. I know that there's carpet on the ceiling, like when you first walk in to like the great room or whatever they call it.
Right.
It wasn't a part of the set, so they did miss a few things. I'm sure there was a limited budget, and they did the best they could with what they had. But,
right.
Plus,
however Graceland looks today, or looked even in 1979, isn't exactly how it would have been when he lived there the whole time. Right. But no, I want to go to Graceland as well. I really do. I want to do all of the sort of Tennessee and then go down to New Orleans. I mean, because all that music, for whatever reason, and like I said, I'm a middle-class white guy from England. But all that music just completely and utterly speaks to me. All that music from that area, part of the world, Nashville and all that. I love all that.
We were actually talking about this yesterday. That I remember when I was like a little kid, like a child, like 7 or 8 years old, and liking Elvis.
Right.
And people would say, like, why does this little kid like Elvis? How do you not like Elvis?
Yeah, right.
How do you not hear Elvis's music and not feel something?
Right.
Good, bad, or indifferent. How do you not feel something?
And also, it's so diverse. Like, there's early Elvis, there's like late, mad R&B disco Elvis, there's gospel, soulful, slow balladeer Elvis, there's crooner Elvis, there's all these different aspects. Like, it's like saying you don't like Frank Sinatra. Like, everyone has to like Frank Sinatra, you know what I mean? Like, I understand people going, I don't like the White Album or Sgt. Pepper's by the Beatles, because
that's, odd. And I also know people going, well, I don't like the poppy early Beatles either. That I kind of understand. How do you not love, like, Elvis and Frank Sinatra? Like, it's just...
I don't understand it. I don't understand when someone says they don't see what the appeal in Elvis was. Elvis was bigger than life itself.
Right.
Whether it was an intentional thing or it just sort of worked out that way, it was an unintentional, like, that it was just a gut feeling and he went with it and it worked,
Yeah.
I have no idea. But how do you...
Right, great. Delicious. Always good, man. Always good.
How do you not like the showmanship? How do you not like the stage show? How do you not like the groundbreaking sound and the groundbreaking movement he was doing on stage? And M. Sullivan, they had to shoot him from the waist up. They thought it was perverse at the time.
I know,
he was
right?
pushing so many boundaries. This is a real story. When Elvis first came out and they first started playing him on the radio, they sort of touched on this a little bit, but I think it was a sensitive issue, so they didn't go too far with it. But everyone really thought, A, Elvis's name was Ellis,
right,
and B, that he was an African American.
Right.
They had no idea that he was a 17 or 18-year-old white kid,
right,
poor white kid. Everybody thought he was black. Everybody thought, like, this is like the next big black singer.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think a lot of people that at the time in Tennessee, probably a lot of white people that thought to themselves, well, if this is a young black guy, I'm not going to listen to that.
Right.
That's not my kind of music. And I think a lot of people missed out very early on. No, that doesn't happen.
No.
So I think a lot of people missed out on his very early stuff because that's what they thought. They hadn't seen him on television before.
Right.
They had no idea. He literally pushed so many boundaries at the time, and he was so over the top, and everything that he did was calculated, or at least it seemed like it was. So, just in that, how do you not find any of that appealing? How do you not find someone that is willing to push rock and roll forward, or whatever type of music it is?
Right.
R&B or soul or gospel or any of those things. Who else was had a stage show like he did in the 70s where he had the Jordanaires and he had a full arrangement or an orchestra and he had all these things going on. He was doing a karate show. He's going around kissing women in the audience and giving away scarves, and nobody else did anything like that.
Right.
He's an original. He is one of these people that is like above everybody else, and I don't even want to say that he was before his own time,
right?
Because he was his time.
Oh yeah, he defined his time.
He is exactly what his time was because of the things that he did and said, and the songs they recorded, and the way that he sang. And
I think the only thing that the rock and rollers had a problem with in their story, whoever it was, Chuck Berry or whoever, is that when it comes to like the psychedelic end of the 60s, they just don't know what to do with that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they just, because that's the one era he doesn't fit in. Like he fits in the 70s and he fits in the 50s and early 60s just fine, right? But it's that late 60s, the civil rights and the psychedelia and
Woodstock and the whole deal. He doesn't fit into any of that.
Doesn't fit into any of that. But then when you go to like disco or whatever 70s, like he then fits back in again.
Right.
But then he then feels a bit more like a statesman of rock and roll. He's more like then Sinatra or whatever. He's more like the older guy of, the music your dad listened to.
Right. Yeah. He was the elder statesman of music at the time.
Right.
Yeah. It was a generation past.
Right.
But how did young people still not find what he was doing appealing? It's the same thing as a Lady Gaga now or anybody else.
Well, that's what makes me laugh is that everything that's done now is so passé. It's like when they try and be shocking or when they try and bring sexuality into it, I'm like, come on, dude, this was done like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Like really, I still need to see Miley Cyrus's muff like flash on screen. Like, come on, guys, the internet exists and there is billions upon billions of free porno clips I can watch. I don't need to see an androgynous 14-year-old's vagina. You know what I mean? Like, who gives a fuck? And it just boggles my mind that people are like, oh yeah, more of this, please. I'm like,
Yeah.
And I hate to sound like, get off my lawn, grumpy old man, blah, 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 blah. And I'm sure everybody, when they hit like their 30s or 40s, had these conversations about the current generation. But I don't know, man. I just look at it and I go, this has all been done. This is just tedious at this point. Like, I would rather someone get up and just play a decent song. Like, that's why I like the the current slight resurgence of Americana music, like old rockabilly and old folk and old blues and stuff like that, that's happening. Because, while, there's plenty to laugh at with someone like Mumford & Sons or whatever, because you're like, all right, you're all a bunch of guys from London, can we stop wearing the leather waistcoats and singing like we're, balladeers from either Ireland or the South? But they're still very talented, and they are still part of a movement that's bringing back authentic instruments, decent songs, great lyrics. I mean, I was just listening to the album that they did, and I don't know if you heard about this, but they put together 6 or 7 musicians under T-Bone Burnett.
I did.
To do like 30 different lyrics that Dylan had left over from the Basement era when he was playing with the band up at the Big Pink.
Have you seen the movie about that?
I haven't seen the documentary. I've only heard the album.
It's great.
Oh, they've already released it?
They've already released it, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I need to see that. Because I also loved, I'm not a huge Springsteen fan, but I loved Springsteen doing the Pete Seeger sessions. Yeah. I loved that album. I thought it was really great. And I saw the documentary on him making that as well. And the thing that excites me now is not all like the big flash and bang. The thing that excited me about that was seeing Springsteen in his kitchen and living room, right, with his wife and his friends and some pals and blah, 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 blah. And they're just jamming, they're just playing, they're just singing, they're singing these old traditional songs. And then in the middle of it, he's like, we're going to do a key change, up to E. And then everyone just goes up to the next thing. And everyone is so, tight and spot on and talented. And, that's what excites me now. And that's what excites when you listen back to, early Elvis, or you listen to Richie Valens, or you listen to, these guys back then. Is what excites you is just the talent and what they're doing with it and the abilities they had and the innovations they were making.
Well, back then, they didn't have technology on their side. There was no auto-tune, there were no synthesizers, there was no computer programs to make them seem much better than they are. Now almost all music is run through a computer to make it sound as good as possible. They didn't have that back then.
No.
It was basically, 2 tin cans and a string. And if it sounded good, it sounded good. And if it didn't, it didn't. You didn't have a choice.
Right. I also made an observation while we were watching La Bamba, and that was if the record industry worked like it does now, in other words, that you had to tour and tour and tour and tour before you even got a record contract, we would never have had the music of Richie Valens, Buddy Holly, and the Big Bopper.
No way.
It just never would have happened.
No way.
You know what I mean? Back then, the record companies and distribution houses were just looking to get hold of as many of this stuff as possible because it was big money, essentially. Because once rock and roll hit, we need our rock and roller from our town or from our ethnicity or from our whatever it is.
Right.
We need to find them, we need to put them on a coach, we need to get them out there, but we also need to get their, radio play.
Right. And back then, records were literally 2 songs.
Right.
There's side A and side B. So, for a guy like Elvis, for the longest time, I don't know if this still stands true or not, but he had the Guinness Book of World Record for the most gold records ever in the history of mankind.
Yep.
But most of his records at the time were only 2 songs.
Right.
So, you write 10 songs, that's 5 records. You could knock out 5 records in a year. So, technically that's cheating as to today's standards, your standard, 10 to 14 song album. But
which Matt Farley should be in the Guinness World Records. He should be in the Guinness World Records as the most prolific musician to ever exist.
I agree with that.
I've written to them.
Have you really?
Yeah, I wrote to Guinness, and I also tweeted them, but I wrote to Guinness and said that they should look into it.
We need to start the Matt Farley revolution, starting today.
Yeah.
We need to start the Matt Farley revolution, and we need we all need to somehow contact Guinness and let them know that they're doing him a wild injustice.
They are a wild injustice.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. But concerning the movie, I mean, I think our love for Elvis is well documented, but I just think that concerning the movie, it's interesting. It has an interesting take on him. It's just as a whole, it's a bit slow. It's a bit, here's this little thing you know about him, and here's this little thing you know about him. Scenes of him doing karate, it's we've got one scene of him doing karate. Okay, well, that's the karate thing you know about, right? One scene of him being paranoid about being assassinated by JFK, that's that done. One scene of him arguing with Priscilla, right, that's done. It's kind of like that, isn't it?
It's very vanilla. It's very vanilla. some of the things were a little bit out of sequence. Some of the things were twisted a little bit to make it seem. I feel like they twisted it to make it seem more vanilla than it was.
Right.
Yes, he argued with Priscilla once in one scene.
Right.
Did they forget to mention that he kind of knocked her out around a little bit? Yeah, they forgot to mention that. Did they forget to mention that was years worth of arguments and going back and forth, and her threatening to leave and him telling her she can't leave, and
Right.
it was a whole thing.
Right.
It was a whole thing. They sort of glossed over a lot of the little things to make it as family friendly.
Well, because he hadn't been in the ground that long either, so I suppose that plays into it.
I don't know. I feel like if I was making a movie about someone, if I was making a biopic about somebody, I would want it to be as factual as possible.
Right.
Because you're sort of doing the guy a disservice by glossing over things and changing things and making him seem like he was a better person than he was. If he was a jerk in real life, should we show him as a jerk? Or no, you shouldn't make him seem like he's only just a jerk. You should show other things. You should show that he's a family man and that he cares about things, that he's a normal person. But if he was a jerk, don't not make him seem like a jerk.
But then also don't do, like, the thing that drives me nuts about biopics in general, and the thing that, weirdly enough, the Elvis biopic falls into, and then La Bamba falls into, but with his brother, not with him. In fact, their treatment of Richie Valens is very odd in La Bamba, because it's, again, there's no kind of discussion about kind of the things that I care about. Is like how they got famous, what they had to do, what they had to put into it, and also their songwriting. It's never really touched on. Like, you never see like people writing for Elvis or coming to him with songs, or like him trying out different versions of songs or whatever. That's never in it. With Richie Valens, in La Bamba, he becomes famous overnight. You know what I mean? Because he plays one town hall where there's a huge fight, but everyone ignores that the next day. Like, the fight's over and his girlfriend's like, "Oh, you're amazing," and the record producer's like, "Well, I don't want any of your bandmates, but I'll take you." And it's like, well, how would you know? Like, it's like you could hear anything over the massive fight that was going on. And likewise in La Bamba, you never get to meet the bandmates again, whereas at least in Elvis, the Memphis Mafia kind of stick around, and there was the Red grievance, like, where he doesn't invite Red to the wedding, and da-da-da-da-da. But again, very quickly done, like, really not...
Right. Right.
And he tells them all to get lost, and then they're like, "Why did you do that?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't know, man." And like, they're bringing him back, you know.
Instead of him saying, like, "I'm having a mental breakdown right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't even know what I'm doing. I need help." He just fires everybody, but then instantly takes them right back.
Yeah.
Like, before they can leave the driveway, before they can get in their cars and drive off, no, I was just kidding, come back.
Yeah.
I have to imagine that if he fired everybody, he would have at least let them get out of the driveway, being fuming mad or whatever.
He tries to give the dude who he thinks said something about him money.
Right, yeah.
Let's give him $200.
Just a couple $100.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so, yeah, I don't know.
Well, it's an interesting scene because it's trying to play with, like, how, you know, on one hand, Elvis tries to keep his Tennessee friends around him to, like, keep him grounded. But then he's also aware that at a certain point they start to sponge off him, become reliant on him, abuse him a little bit, you know what I mean? And kind of...
Right, and I feel like they also tried to sway him.
Yeah, they don't have his best interests at heart, you know what I mean? They just...
Yeah, they saw what was happening.
Right.
And that they made the situation whatever they wanted it to be, not what he wanted it to be.
There were a bunch of punks from Memphis, basically, who got to hang around. And it's very noble of him to try and keep his friends around him, but it wasn't necessarily always the best thing, which is, I think, what that scene shows. Absolutely.
What I think they probably should have touched on was Elvis meeting Nixon.
Right.
That was a huge thing.
Yeah.
For them to just completely gloss over the fact that Elvis decides that he's going to go, just on a whim, decides that he's just going to fly out to Washington, D.C. and just force his way into the White House because he wanted to.
Right.
Also, he's just going to force his way over into the FBI to make himself some sort of deputy because that's what he wanted to do. Now, there's plenty of conspiracy theories that go along with how that happened and why it happened, and you can believe whatever it is that you want to believe. I choose to believe that Elvis, being so heavily reliant on prescription medication and being depressed, and I'm sure he was probably bipolar or something of that nature. I'm sure he probably thought it was a really good idea, like, here's what I'll do. I'll go and I'll meet the president, and I'll ask him to make me a federal marshal so that when all of these bad things that seem to happen to me, when these people are trying to take my picture or people trying to break into my house and all these things, I can just deal with it myself. That way I really don't have to ever leave my house.
Right.
I'll be the law. I'll be
the law.
The judge, the jury, and the executioner. I'll do whatever I want.
Yeah.
It probably seemed like a good idea at the time. However, when you're all messed up on drugs, you don't have the clearest of thoughts. And when you have your idiot buddies that are like, you know what, we can get them to spend a bunch of money on us and do all this traveling, and we'll all become, hey Elvis, you know what we should do? We should all become federal marshals. You should tell the president that. You can, because you're Elvis.
Right.
Of course something bad's going to happen. But they completely glossed over that whole meeting, the whole situation, all that kind of stuff.
Well, the movie didn't really go into that.
No,
that second half of his life, anyway.
They didn't talk about anything. They didn't talk about his weight gain and his depression. They didn't talk about prescription drugs whatsoever.
Well, yeah, I mean, but again, I think probably because the Memphis Mafia, were producers on it, and it was made for TV. And, but, I mean, anyway, I think it's a worthwhile film, and I think I probably get more out of it with hindsight than I did actually sitting through it. I think sitting through it, you're like, huh. But with hindsight and having my interest peaked in Elvis anyway, it does add to it. And it's definitely worth film historians seeing it for the first ever working together of Carpenter and Russell, who would go on to, not at the time, because none of the movies were huge, but looking back on it, define like genre filmmaking for the early 80s. I mean, the two of them are in and make 3 or 4 of some of the best movies ever made. Like, The Thing is one of the greatest movies ever made, you know what I mean? It's beautifully shot, beautifully acted, special effects are incredible, the acting is incredible. Like, there's not enough accolades that should have been heaped onto that movie, and yet everyone remembers E.T., which is a crap in comparison. I mean, it's fine, but it's...
Yeah.
Anyway.
I like this movie because it made me question things that I thought I knew.
Right.
And I had to go back and I had to look them up, and I wouldn't have necessarily known some of these things had I not watched this movie.
Right.
I knew that Elvis's mother died, and I assumed it was of a heart attack. They, in John Carpenter's Elvis, she's in the hospital. It appears that she's suffering from exhaustion. She goes to the hospital, and then Elvis's father tells Elvis that she has a bad liver because she's got hepatitis. And then she just dies. So they make it seem like she died from liver complications due to hepatitis. So I had to go back and look that up. It's not true. She did have hepatitis, and she did have a bad liver, but she did, in fact, die of a heart attack.
Right.
So things like I didn't know she had hepatitis. Right. I had no idea. So if it weren't for those little details that they decided to put in, I wouldn't have known any of those things.
No.
And being an Elvis fan, I love learning new things. Like, yeah, Elvis has been dead since 1977, but I want to know as much as possible. Like, I want to know everything about the guy.
Yeah.
I'm infatuated with him. I liked it for that, and it was well written, and it was well performed.
Yeah.
Once again, Kurt Russell does a great Elvis. I mean, a great Elvis.
And he doesn't do the singing. That was done by someone else.
Right. I mean, he
lip syncs it, mimes it.
He depicts Elvis, even just in his speaking voice. If you close your eyes, you hear Elvis. It's not like someone trying to do Elvis. You hear Elvis's voice.
Yeah.
Enjoying this conversation with the incredibly talented New England comedian Jay Mayo? Then why not hear him every single week on Hold the Mayo Podcast with Jay Mayo over at holdthemayopodcast.libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com. He interviews comedians, actors, wrestlers, all sorts of people over there, and it's a phenomenal show. I suggest you all check it out. You can equally find it on iTunes, you can listen to it via the Stitcher app, or indeed you can even find it on Spreaker. Hold the Mayo Podcast is everywhere. It's like a contagious disease, but in a good way and for your ear hole type thing. Anyway, you can also follow Hold the Mayo Pod over at Hold the Mayo Pod on Twitter, or check out Hold the Mayo Podcast on Instagram at Hold the Mayo Podcast. If you like mayo and you like holding things, then why not check out Hold the Mayo Podcast with Jay Mayo? If you like holding things with a big greasy fist of mayo, then why not check out Hold the Mayo Podcast with Jay Mayo? If you like fisting things with your hand covered with an egg-based sandwich condiment, then why not listen to Hold the Mayo podcast with Jay Mayo? At the end of the day, you've got to pity a man whose name is an egg-based sandwich condiment, so why not listen to Hold the Mayo podcast with Jay Mayo? Give back in an uncaring society. You seriously can't live free without it.
Then we watched La Bamba.
Yeah.
So I think I'm gonna get a tea because I don't think we can sit here for another half hour discussing La Bamba without ordering something. So I'm gonna get a tea. Did you want a coffee or anything? Or?
Oh, I'm good with the tea I have.
Oh, okay.
This iced tea is good.
Nice. Yeah. So La Bamba, the Richie Valens story.
Yes.
So I need to ask, why is this your favorite film of all time?
I have a very special bond with La Bamba.
Okay.
When I was a child, and I was on summer break from school, my mother would send me to my grandparents' house.
Okay.
They did not have like toys and things to keep me amused. They did have 2 VHS tapes that I suppose were sort of child-friendly. One was a lot more child-friendly than the other, which was Annie.
Right.
Of course, everybody knows the musical Annie. They had that on VHS.
Right.
Being a young boy, I didn't care about Annie.
Right.
The only other movie that they had that sort of appealed to me was La Bamba. Now, of course, there's swearing and there's nudity and there's violence and there's all kinds of things that a kid that young probably shouldn't have seen.
Right. Lou Diamond Phillips.
Yeah, you know, kids looking at women naked, taking a shower in the beginning and all that kind of stuff. Probably shouldn't have been exposed to that as a very small child. However,
I think it's absolutely fine.
However, my grandparents didn't seem to mind.
No.
So, being that was
Your grandfather, that was his favorite scene.
yeah, probably. Being that they only had the 2 VHS tapes, I ended up watching La Bamba over the course of years, probably 200 times.
Wow.
Probably 200 times.
Wow.
It got to the point where, like, I would try to count all the swears that I knew of.
Right.
Of course, sometimes they swear in Spanish, and I'm sure I didn't know all of the swear words. But, like, I would play a game with it where I'd literally sit there with, like, a pen and a piece of paper, and I'd try to write down every single time. You know, just I had nothing else to do.
Right, of course.
Stuck in my grandparents' house, and I'll just watch La Bamba again.
Yeah.
It ended up becoming that one movie for me. Everybody's got that one movie where it doesn't matter if it's on TV or they're flipping through the DVDs or whatever. If you see it, you just stop and watch it.
Right.
Everybody's got their one. That's my one.
Right.
Even though I've seen it literally hundreds of times, if it's on TV, I stop and I watch it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where in, what part of the movie, even if it's the last 10 minutes of the movie, I'll still sit there and watch it.
Right.
It's my one childhood memory that it's not even vivid, I guess. It's just the one thing from my childhood that I can always go back to. I guess it's just like a positive thing. Like, yeah, I watch this movie over and over and over again. Like,
right.
it feels comfortable.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my one movie.
Right. That makes sense. And it's interesting in this one because it's probably the least cliche-riddled biopic, except that the brother gets the cliche like life.
Yeah.
He gets I'm an alcoholic, I have a baby out of wedlock, I'm constantly going to be jealous of my brother, I come from a different father, blah, blah, blah. Like, he has all the problems.
Yeah, well, I think this also goes back to the fact that, once again, not unlike the Elvis movie, Richie's real-life brother, Bob, was a producer on the movie. So, of course, it's going to be, woe is me.
Right.
Look at me. And of course, that adds to the movie also. It adds to the script. If there's conflict, if it was just all the positive things, and then, of course, we all know what happened. Richie Valens dies at the end. Everybody knows that.
Right.
So, if it's just, positive, 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 and then he dies at the end, it's not a very good story to tell.
No.
So,
and he does, the thing that I like La Bamba. I think the acting's great. I think the music performances are great, and I enjoy the way it's put together. My issue with it was obviously when you look at the ending credits, or if you just know anything about Richie Valens, he wrote a lot of songs. He was a songwriter in the same way Buddy Holly was, and there was never, as a songwriter myself, that's kind of what I'm interested in. I understand all the other stuff and the unconditional love between him and Donna and all the rest of it, but and those things, and his mother and his brother and all that, that's all fine. But the two things that I feel La Bamba doesn't touch on that I really think it should have touched on was A, his songwriting, because it's unclear because he does a lot of covers in the film, as well as doing obviously the 3 songs he's really known for. But they never focus on the songwriting particularly. And although they show the whole Tijuana scene, and they show him hearing La Bamba and thinking, oh, I could do a rocked up version of this and da-da-da-da-da, and I'm going to sing in Spanish and all the rest of it, there was no idea, there was nothing in the movie made about just how, like, important that would have been for him to have made that decision, you know, coming from a Hispanic family.
Right. And there not being a big Hispanic rock and roll
thing at that time.
Icon.
Right.
That didn't exist yet.
Right.
He was the first.
Right.
So not unlike, you know, some of these big moments that happened in Elvis that they sort of glossed over. They certainly glossed over that aspect of there's never been like a predominant Hispanic rock star.
Right.
That's not a thing yet.
Right. Even if they've done, like, you know, when he first does La Bamba, when he gets bumped up the playlist at one of those shows where he's going around with
the Alan Freed show. I think
the Alan Freed show. Right. Even if they've done some cod cliche thing and had all the white folk like sat stern in their chairs and had the Hispanics get up like dancing and laughing or whatever, and then the white folk being like, oh, okay, and then dancing, which would have been horribly hackneyed, but at least it would have been some nod towards the fact that at a certain point, although the whole movie he's like, I don't speak Spanish, and, you know, he's part Native American as well, right?
Well,
she said something about your father was a...
Yeah. He,
and Lou Diamond Phillips is, right?
Lou Diamond Phillips is Lou Diamond Phillips is a huge mix of things, but he's half Filipino,
right,
and the rest of it is a huge mix of other nationalities, which also includes Native American. But I mean, he's the largest majority of Lou Diamond Phillips' DNA is Filipino.
Right.
So it just seemed weird that a guy that's probably 3/4 Mexican and the other quarter Native American would be played by a Filipino guy.
Yeah.
Just seems a little off, but whatever. He fit the role. And he acted well. So.
Oh yeah, no, he's fantastic in it.
One of those things where when you play Elvis, you have to look and sound like Elvis. But when you play Richie Valens, it's like whoever's the most talented actor gets the job. He doesn't have to look anything like the actual Richie Valens.
Right, because there wasn't anything specific about Valens apart from his ethnicity.
No. I mean, he didn't have any distinctive features, or you know, he didn't have a.
He wasn't the big Bopper. He wasn't Jerry Lee Lewis. He didn't have the big curly blonde hair. Right.
He wasn't known for his horn-rimmed glasses, or any of that. You know, he was just. He looked like a regular guy.
Although I have to say, the guy they got to play Buddy in this, like, I would have picked anybody else. I did not like the guy they picked to play Buddy. He seemed too manly. He wasn't nerdy enough.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing of the Lou Diamond Phillips situation. It's like, who can we just who can act the best? It doesn't matter what they really look like.
Right.
You'll get the point.
Yeah.
We're gonna tell you who it is. He's gonna wear the glasses. You'll get it.
Yeah. It's good, and it has let's not forget, it has a cracking soundtrack. You know what I mean? It has a really, really good soundtrack.
Los Lobos did all of the Richie Valens songs for that album.
But the score is also done by Miles Davis and someone else. Who's the other big guy who does the brothers? Their brothers.
The Smothers Brothers.
The Smothers Brothers did the soundtrack with Miles Davis.
It wasn't brothers at all. The person I was looking for was Carlos Santana, of course. Sorry about that. Anyway, back to the show.
Anyway, it's got a cracking soundtrack. And Los Lobos does the Richie Valens.
Yeah. Los Lobos did, and they had a great guest appearance, being the band that was in Tijuana playing La Bamba, where Richie gets the idea to play La Bamba.
Right.
I thought that was kind of a cool nod to actually have Los Lobos in the movie, being that they were recording all of Richie's music, re-recording Richie's music for the soundtrack and for the movie itself. So I thought that was kind of cool, and they did a great job with it. You know, they didn't. The re-recordings of the songs were almost spot on for Richie's original recording. It's just the quality of the sound was just better.
Right.
Other than not hearing tape hiss in the background, you would think that was actually Richie Valens singing those songs.
Yeah.
So I think they did a really good job with that. In that regard, you know, when people play Elvis, sometimes they butcher the Elvis singing, or they butcher the way he speaks, and they overdo it and all that kind of stuff. I thought that they did a really good job with the Richie Valens stuff.
Yeah.
Because it sounded like how Richie would have sounded.
Yeah.
You know, it sounded exactly like his music sounded.
No, I thought that was very well done. I think it's shot well. I think that the only thing is that the Bob character gets repetitive.
Well, yeah.
He has this thing that he's an artist, and because it does become the Bob show, like it really does for most of the movie, you kind of want him at the end, a little thing come up and go, and Bob, Valens, it wasn't Valens, what was their full name? Valenzuela, that's it. Bob Valenzuela went on to become an animator at Disney, or you know what I mean? Like you want him to succeed because he's gone through all the shit. He goes through all the shit that Richie doesn't go through. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
and normally in a biopic, it's like, oh, I was on drugs, I'm fat, I look at the Johnny Cash, walk the line like I'm an asshole, I'm a drunk, I'm on drugs. But I come back and I wear black and I sing in a prison, and from that moment on I'm ionized as an icon, which he should be. I mean, Johnny Cash is amazing and legendary, but I'm just saying that the cliche tropes of a biopic is always like, my first wife never understands me, so we dump her because she's a shrill, crazy. We dump her, then we marry the person who's going to stick by me no matter what a fucker I am, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then everything's going to be all right in the end, and I'm going to live happy ever after with June Carter, and we're going to make amazing music, and everyone's going to think I'm a god, and neither Carpenter's Elvis has Priscilla being sort of shrill and a bit of a harpy and a bit of a like, why can't you just pay attention to me? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like what it doesn't show is the nights and nights and nights she sat on her own going, well, this is all very well, but like now what? You know?
Exactly.
Like it doesn't show it.
There's literally only one scene in Carpenter's Elvis where she even brings up the fact that she's just lost and alone, basically.
Right.
And it's when he's ramping up to do his comeback tour.
Right.
Apparently doesn't tell her at all. She just walks into the living room where they're rehearsing, and that's how she finds out.
Can I get a refill of water? Can I also get an English breakfast tea, please?
Okay. You want anything on the side?
No, I mean, I'll have some milk.
No? Okay.
So they only touch on that.
On the side of English breakfast tea?
I don't know. A muffin.
Oh, right. Well, we just had a huge break. He may not.
He doesn't know.
No, right. So carry on.
So they kind of gloss over the fact that, or they only touch on the fact that she's been basically sitting in the house by herself for years since she was, 17 years old.
Right.
Just waiting for him to be that family man that he supposedly wants to be.
Thank you. And whereas with Richie Valens, he's the one who doesn't get the love he wants because Donna's dad is a racist.
Right. Which is great, by the way. I think the fact that they showed that her father is a racist, and that was the huge contention between,
I also like the fact that when he says, have you been out with other guys? She's like, yeah, a few.
Yeah, no big deal. But that's what made Richie, I think, keep pushing that relationship. Had it just been, they went on a date and then she said, I don't feel like going out with you anymore. That's not an interesting story.
Right.
I'm sure that he would have been a talented musician, but I have to believe that was a big part of his drive. There was a big part of him writing the song Donna and him wanting to get her to, forget about what your dad says. Let me prove to you that I actually do love you.
Right.
And it seems silly to think a teenage kid, because you have to take Lou Diamond Phillips. Every time I watch this movie, I'm looking at Lou Diamond Phillips, but you have to remember that this was a child.
Right.
He died at 19.
Yeah.
He was a child.
Crazy.
He was a child.
It's crazy that below 19 they were shipping him off to Philly. And...
Right. Yeah, he quit high school so that he'd become a rock star. Quit high school. And
I just think there's a much more, there's a better way to tell that story in a weird way.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But you have to...
Not that La Bamba's bad, just...
No. But you have to take Lou Diamond Phillips in his mid to late 20s out of the situation and realize that these are children going through that. So sure, yeah, if your dad says you can't go out on a date and you're 15 or 16 years old, you say, all right, well, that sucks, but that's the way it works.
It's also the 50s,
Right. Yeah, obviously the dad was racist, and that was a point of contention for them, and I have to believe that was the motivation for him to be as good as he possibly could and to write songs like Donna, a slew of other songs that they never even get into, but is to prove to her, like, this is for real. Yes, I've always wanted to play rock and roll. I've dedicated myself to learning how to play guitar and learning how to sing and write and all that.
None of which is shown in the movie.
Right.
Either. He just picks it up and is a,
right. Well, yeah. They start the movie and he just happens to be carrying a guitar around with him. You're like, all right, I guess this guy plays the guitar. Like they don't. There's nothing to do with.
He has 2 guitars. They live in a trailer park.
Yeah.
They're like day laborers.
They are day laborers. All of them.
He has 2 like
guitars.
mint guitars, amazing guitars.
Yeah. But he does have a shit amp because when he goes to try out for his first band, they do make fun of. They say, "Would you find that in the trash?" He's like, "Well, it is mine now."
Yeah, right.
So they made reference to how bad his amp is. However, for a family that literally can't afford a place to live, or at least
they're living in a tent when the movie starts.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they're all literally working the fields.
Yeah.
Picking whatever those were, apricots or peaches or whatever they were.
Right.
For a family that literally can't afford a place to go, and they have to rely on Bob running drugs from Tijuana, they really did. He had, 2 decent guitars, and I guess that is all possible. I suppose if that's who Richie Valens was, if he was that dedicated to his music and his writing and all that kind of stuff, then I suppose you would work as much as you could and spend the little bit of money you had on buying a guitar.
Right.
So, I mean, I like that.
It also didn't explain, it explained that they went back to California and he moved back in the trailer park and went back to school. I presume that when we meet him in the beginning, that's the summer holidays or something, I guess. That's
they
their vacation
never cover
or whatever?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that
because he's not at high school while he's also working in the...
No. He's clearly not in school while they're out working in the fields.
Right.
I would assume what I took from that is that was their life. That's just what they did. There were other kids running around, living in this shanty village, if you will. And that was just what they did. I'm sure. Whatever.
Well, he went to high school when he could go to high school.
Right. I'm sure that whenever
and he worked when he couldn't.
Yeah, he just worked, during the day, and there wasn't the laws that we have now, and they never even really say exactly where they are.
Right.
So if they were in Mexico and it was the 50s, and your kids can go to work instead of going to school, we don't care.
Right.
That's a very real possibility.
Right.
So it all seems weird. I mean, I watched this in the 80s when it came out, the late 80s. So for me, that was like a complete night and day lifestyle that I didn't even know could have possibly existed. Like, they have children picking fruit instead of going to school and living in tents, and
tobacco farms still do that to this day.
Yeah, well, that's weird for a guy like me to know, in the late 80s, I had no idea that was even a possibility.
Right.
No idea. But
we are childs of privilege, as Matt Farley would say.
This is very true. But not unlike an Elvis, he wanted the music came first for him because it's what he felt like. This is the life that I want to have. This is what I've always wanted to do, and it's going to take me from being this poor guy to being able to provide for my family. Now, obviously, Richie never got the chance to buy all the lavish things that Elvis did for his family, being that he died at 19.
Sort of a bungalow, though.
Very, very real possibility that he could have been just as big, or if relatively close to as big a rock star as Elvis was at some point.
Right. I also felt, because I'm a big Buddy Holly fan as well, and I also felt like he was an innovator. Buddy Holly was an innovator. just plugging in his guitar was like an innovation.
Right.
When you hear some of his early stuff, there's it's almost, it predates almost like heavy metal or heavy blues or heavy rock or that kind of stuff, like some of his electric stuff that Buddy Holly does. But you feel, Valens, we don't know. He's still sort of too young in a way, but and we don't have that many recordings. But I do feel like that Buddy Holly especially could have turned into a really interesting songwriter. I just feel like him especially could have become, had he lived, quite a weird and wonderful songwriter. Because he was already on the path of writing kind of slightly weird, slightly different arranged rock and blues.
It would have been interesting to see I mean, they say that that's the day that rock and roll died. The day that
Right.
they got in the plane crash and they died. They say that's the day that rock and roll died. I wonder what rock and roll would have been
Right.
had that not happened.
Right.
What would have happened with all three of those guys? What would have happened with the Big Bopper?
Yeah.
I mean, would he have gone on?
Would modern bands have a telephone on the stage and
That
be
was
singing
so
into
ridiculous, so ridiculous. But, I mean, he was a big pop star at the time.
it? Right.
That's what people liked. I mean, yeah, it was hokey and whatever, but that's what kids wanted to hear. So, I mean, what would have happened to a guy like that? I mean, we can sit here and we can speculate about what would happen to Richie Valens. Would he have continued on writing these great songs? Would Buddy Holly have gone on to, be the biggest rock star of the time or whatever? Which is, all of these things could have happened, and we can speculate as to what would happen. I like to look at it as a whole. Where would rock and roll be today
Right.
if it hadn't died on that night when they got into a plane crash? They got into a plane and it went down. Where would rock and roll as a whole be? It could be totally different. We could be sitting here talking about our new favorite bands, and the reason that we like them so much is because they sounded like Buddy Holly's later work.
Right.
Right? I mean, how weird would that have been?
Yeah.
And
Or do you think that it would have just happened, because, like we said, Elvis didn't weather the 60s well.
Right.
Jerry Lee Lewis does the same old shtick now. Little Richard does the same old shtick, or did the same old shtick for the longest time. Like, they never changed, those guys never changed up their act. Elvis changed up his act, obviously. And maybe if we'd gone into the 80s, he would have done what,
weird synth pop. Who knows?
Yeah, he would have done what McCartney and Clapton and Bowie and all those people did when they went into the 80s. They all became sounding 80s, you know what I mean? Billy Joel, 80s, like everyone wants, it's almost like 1981 came about and everyone was like, well, this is how music sounds now.
Yeah.
Because if you listen to anything by these guys who were big in the 60s and 70s, Clapton is a prime example because his 60s stuff, like with Cream, sounds very kind of, his early 60s stuff is very rock and roll and bluesy with the Yardbirds. Then he goes psychedelic with Cream. Then he's like 70s balladeer with Derek and the Dominoes, and then he's got like that post the band sound because he was a big devotee of the band. So then he does like his solo albums in the 70s are all very kind of country infused blues rock stuff. And then in the 80s, all of a sudden he's doing like little poppy things, and you're like, all right.
What happened?
He's like the Madonna of guitarists. Like, he just changes every decade. You can really just track his whole thing.
That is a great analogy. He is the Madonna of guitar players.
Well, because Madonna every decade just tried to stay relevant and change her shtick. So, and he just there's a you can buy like a Clapton collection, which spans I think like the first 40 years of his career, and there's pictures of him, and he goes from like, oh, there's the hippie look, there's the 70s look, there's the like drugged out on heroin look, oh look, there's the 80s look, he's got the floppy thing with the blonde highlight and the whole bit, oh, there's the early 90s look, he's got the businessman Robert Palmer thing going on, then he's got, like, it's just, he could literally, and whereas Bowie innovated, because Bowie was always doing different weird and wonderful things and sort of innovated stuff, Clapton just followed. Yeah.
It's much easier to follow. There's a lot more money to be made.
That's not saying he's not hugely talented. It's just
Oh yeah. Anybody that's ever listened to Eric Clapton, I would hope would take away that he's a very talented musician. Not, wow, this sounds super 80s.
Right.
I would hope that they heard the music for what it is.
Right.
But where would a guy like Eric Clapton be
without any of these?
Without any of these.
Where would the Beatles be? I mean, the Beatles, literally, if you hear them when they talk on the anthology about meeting Fats Domino, about meeting Elvis Presley, about things, they remember, like, the big gold ring and the huge mansions and the pianos they had and da-da-da-da-da, and being like, shit, we're the biggest band in the world right now and we don't have any of this stuff. Like, this is major, like what the rock and rollers were doing and what they were doing with the sort of the first, and they were sort of the first youth generation to have a lot of money. They were the first people in their early 20s to suddenly have a shit ton of money. This whole thing about Miley Cyrus and Justin Bieber, that's not new, you know what I mean? Like, they just, they were the first kind of generation to have it. Because I don't think there weren't like a bunch of people in the 30s or 40s who were like 18, 19.
There was a depression.
Right.
It's not possible.
Right. No, but okay.
Oil baron.
Right. So they really are the first generation, certainly in the 20th century, to be that young, be that left on their own, to be that wealthy.
Yeah.
And a lot of what defines them, you know, be it the Big Bopper or Fats Domino or whatever it is that kind of gaudy excess to some extent.
Yeah. And
whether that would have destroyed the music anyway, or whether they would have gone through that and then been like, all right, how about we scale it back again and we go back to just writing some good music?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting idea. If we can look at Elvis and say Elvis didn't weather the 60s. He just early 60s, okay. And then he literally had nothing, and then he tried to come back and it didn't work. So he just sort of went into seclusion for quite a long time. But he tried to, I don't even want to say reinvent himself because that doesn't seem right. But he found,
it feels like a natural evolution. It doesn't feel like a reinvention.
But
it feels like the collars just got bigger and the clothes just got louder.
He found a way to get himself back to where he was at one point in music. It'd be interesting to know what would have happened to these other three guys, the Richie Valens and the Big Bopper and Buddy Holly. It would be interesting to see how they would have dealt with the generations changing and the styles of music changing and progression and all that kind of stuff. What would the Big Bopper be doing in the 60s?
Right.
Would he follow suit into, you know, doing stuff like acid rock? Or I can't imagine he would.
I think Buddy Holly and maybe Richie Valens would have, as songwriters, this is the other thing, Elvis doesn't really write his songs.
No.
They're mainly like Lieber and Stalin, right?
Yeah,
the early ones.
Elvis has borrowed so many different styles and so many different people's songs that it's hard for him to say like, oh, this is my music or this is my style, because all he does is he just borrows from everybody else. He started with the old R&B and blues stuff, which is actually very interesting in Carpenter's Elvis, the song selection that they chose to use for that movie. And then you watch La Bamba and you're like, wait a minute, how come these guys are using almost the same exact soundtrack here?
Right.
Which I suppose that, you know, these old R&B songs or these old blues songs.
Everyone did the same song.
Right. They all did the same thing, and it's very easy to see that they took influence from this person or that person.
Right, because they were all written by Tin Pan Alley people,
right,
and then those songs were just disseminated out to
whoever wants to do it. You can do it. Like there's no
Cash
stigma
did
to
rockabilly and stuff.
Yeah.
And he went on to write a ton of his stuff, but
there's no stigma of doing a cover song back then. Like, it didn't matter how many times it was done.
Right.
If you can make it your own and you think people will listen to it, let's record it.
Because they were performers. Right. There was performers and there were songwriters. Like Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens. These guys wrote great songs and were, you know, in their own right, great performers. Whereas Elvis is like Sinatra. Elvis is a performer. I always equate Elvis with Sinatra more because he's a performer. He's not a songwriter. He's not. He might have some comment on arrangement or how he sounds in a track, but ultimately his whole thing is being on stage and making any song you give him, from quote unquote the Great American Songbook, swing. Like make anything belt out to the cheap seats. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like that's what they can do.
Yeah. They
can take a song with incredibly talented musicians, and blow the roof off the place. That's what they're good at. You know, Holly performed his songs because you kind of had to. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't a traditional frontman. He wasn't a guy who would have necessarily picked to do it.
No.
But his songs were so strong, and he had like a look unto his own, and he's kind of doing his thing. Which is why I think that even if he wasn't still performing in the end of the 60s, he would have at least been writing songs, you think. You know what I mean? Like Neil Diamond did, or any of those guys.
I would like to think that I'd like to think that both Buddy Holly and Richie Valens would be able to sustain these long careers. Like you were just talking about Eric Clapton, and you know, you can grab a box set of his first 40 years in their entertainment. I would like to think that a guy like Buddy Holly or Richie Valens would have that 40-year career and be able to sustain and be able to sort of change their sound or whatever it is and be relevant.
Water? No, I'm good. Yeah, we'll take the check.
But I mean, once again, this is all wild speculation.
Yeah.
I think there's a special place in my heart because I enjoyed this movie so much. Had I never watched the movie, I probably wouldn't know very much about Richie Valens whatsoever. I'm sure that particular, 50s early rock and roll, basic. Let's call it what it is. It was just basic rock and roll.
Yeah, well, it's sped up
Thank you very
blues.
much.
Right. It's not what I grew up on. You know.
So what would you say are like the top 5 strengths of this movie?
Okay. What I really love about La Bamba, I almost like the Bob stuff. I like the Bob show.
He's a glorious overactor.
He is.
He's phenomenally
Isai
great.
Morales he overdoes
And
Bob.
that filthy slut Rosie.
Oh yeah,
That's hardly fair.
Yeah.
She goes from being like, I'm going to bonk you under a tree, to being the most like, cold and standoffish, and
Yeah.
like, no, you're never having sex with me again, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, but the first night he comes back from prison, you're willing to like just have him under a tree? Like, it completely doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. But she changes her mind like a week later.
Right. She becomes frigid, like a week later.
I kind of like the Bob show. I like that they showed the dynamic between Richie and his manager.
Right.
The guy that Bob Gold or whatever his name.
Joey Pants.
Yeah, Joey Pants from The Sopranos. You probably know him better. But I like the dynamic between the
Great
two.
hair
I like
in this movie.
he has
Or lack of hair.
He has. I don't know why they always do that with him. They always put, like, when he was on Sopranos, such a bad wig on him. But, of course, they made a joke of it at the end. But at the end of his run on Sopranos. But, that was one of very few movies that you see the fact that he doesn't actually have any hair. It was just nice.
Yeah.
But I did like the dynamic between the two. I like that they showed... And now, again, we don't know if any of this stuff is true, but they showed him... he just sort of stumbled upon Richie's one concert prior to being famous, enjoying it, and then he goes to the house and he's trying to speak Spanish to the mother, just assuming, like, in a very unassuming racist kind of way, like, oh, these people must not speak English. I saw
it more as a sort of respectful thing.
The day before, I went and talked to her at the concession stand at this VFW hall.
Right.
I know she speaks English, but I'm going to go there and pretend like she doesn't speak English, assuming that she clearly couldn't possibly speak English in this trailer, being a Mexican woman.
Right.
But he reaches out and he says, like, I really like what I saw yesterday. I want to bring you into my studio. And he seems like an honest guy. He seemed, I'm sure that
there's a kick-ass studio in his basement.
Yeah, and then he downplays the whole thing, like, it's no big deal, but we'll just put down a couple of tracks now, and then we'll go to like the real studio. It was like the nicest basement studio in the history of basement studios.
Little red and black foam tiles on the wall. Yeah.
Really nice. But I like the dynamic between the two. They made him seem like an honest guy that really cared about this kid. Yes, there was also the aspect of he wanted to make money.
Right.
And he kind of found that diamond in the rough sort of thing.
Blue diamond in the rough.
Blue diamond in the rough. Great pun, by the way.
Blue diamond in the Phillips rough. Yeah.
So I like their dynamic. I liked the Bob show. I liked the relationship between Richie and Donna. I like the fact that he didn't, or at least they didn't make it seem like he didn't let things like Donna's racist father get in between them, or the fact that
he seemed very true blue, like he never had sex with anybody.
Right, he seemed like what I took from the movie is that Richie Valens, he was sort of singularly minded in that he knew that he wanted to play rock and roll, and he knew that he wanted to provide for his family, and he knew that he loved this girl that he met at school.
Right.
That's it. It seemed like he was an honest and genuine person, and that there was no other intentions whatsoever.
Right.
It wasn't.
He's not interested in any other women.
Right. He seems
got the most attractive women in the whole country throwing themselves at him.
Right.
Not interested.
Yep.
Donna's the one for him.
Good to go.
Yeah.
Listen, my girl's at home. You know, that kind of thing.
It also doesn't speak well to like genealogy, because like whoever Bob's father was clearly made him an absolute shit, and whoever Richie Valens' father was might as well have been knighted or sainted or something. Because, and what does that say about the mother that she had like back in the day, like boys from two different style.
Yeah, well,
Never explored, right?
no. It's never brought up. It's never brought up, other than the fact of when Richie comes home from a tour for Christmas, and he goes into the guest house, and he's looking at a picture of his father, and Bob starts talking about the father and how that he mentions, oh well, he was your dad, he's not my dad, and again, once again, to play into the whole Bob show of stepdad never loved me and he loved you, and that's why you're, what do you think, you're the king of the goddamn world, and all that kind of stuff he gets into because he wasn't loved, and he's the bastard child and all that kind of stuff. Other than him, Bob launching into the Bob show, you wouldn't have known that they had different parents. You would have no idea.
You would have just assumed they cast wildly differing actors to play
brothers, right? Yeah, they don't really look like each other, but they're brothers.
Right.
Well, they might not look like each other. Why? Because Bob went to prison? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, who cares?
Yeah. So, yeah, they don't really touch
Danny
on that.
DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger can be twins.
Right, yeah.
And these two can be brothers.
Yeah, why not? That makes sense. I think if Bob...
if other brothers showed up and, they were like a black one and a white one.
Yeah.
Like that might have been
Asian
more
one.
fun. Yeah. They'd be like, what is this mother doing?
Everybody,
and who were
apparently.
the two daughters?
They
were her daughters as well?
Apparently. See,
none of that's ever explained, is
These
it?
are the things that aren't explained. You would assume that they are...
But she never has a man around. She never.
No, you would assume that Richie and Bob had two younger sisters, much younger.
Right.
But they never really explain it. They could be Bob's kids for all we know.
Right. And Bob could be racking them up in trailer parks across the country.
No idea.
And here in Tijuana.
They never really address that. And Bob does address these, like, so Rosie's pregnant. And he's like, well, what do you want me to say? It's not my first, and it certainly won't be my last. So Bob makes mention of having other kids, but they never show it.
Is he saying that about the kids, or is he saying about Rosie?
No. He's saying that about Rosie being pregnant.
No, but I took that to mean like Rosie won't be his first and won't be his last. Kind of thing.
I took it as
maybe it's
I took it as
so maybe
because he's announcing that Rosie's pregnant,
right?
And then he's like, well, what do you want me to say? It's not my first, and it certainly won't be my last.
Right.
So I took that as him having other kids, and he has no intention of just
looking after the kids, because he says at one point, well, my father abandoned me. Maybe I'll just do that.
Yeah.
Like it's a thing.
Like that's a good idea.
Right.
Well, that makes it okay, I guess. So I guess what I really take from La Bamba is I like all the live performances. I really enjoy the scene where they go to Mexico, not for the getting drunk and going to the whorehouse and whatever else they do. I like the...
It looks good. It's shot nice.
Yeah, I like the discovery of La Bamba, the genesis of La Bamba. Richie Richie knows the song, but realizing like, oh, this is a thing.
Right.
Like I bet you I can do this. Because before that, it was just straightforward, basic rock and roll.
And doesn't he say like, if Nat King Cole can sing?
If Nat King Cole can sing in Spanish, why can't I?
Yeah.
That was the manager. That was his point of contention. Is like, Richie, you don't even speak Spanish. Like, we're not going to do a Spanish folk song. You don't even speak Spanish.
Yeah.
So, hey, if Nat King Cole can sing in Spanish, why can't I? Which I thought was a great line.
Right.
This is true. I want to try something a little bit different.
Crosby sings in Gaelic.
Right.
On one of his... No, not Gaelic, sorry, Hawaiian. Does he... The Irish song that he does? There's a bit of Gaelic in that. But, like, I was thinking of the Hawaiian song he does, Christmas in Hawaii. Bing Crosby sings Hawaiian. So
why not?
Yeah.
I'm trying to push myself. I want to do something different. Let me explore this. No, of course, there was a lot on the line. At that point, he only had one record out. Again, a 2-song record.
And La Bamba was the B-side.
So it's like, if it's only 2 songs and you chance one of them and it flops, that's it. You don't get a second chance. You don't. People aren't going to go out and buy your 3rd album knowing that your 2nd one wasn't so good.
Right.
That's just how the business works. So I can understand the reservation, but I love that he wanted to push him, like the realization of like, hey, I bet you I can do this, and I could make this my own. Because when he sees the band playing it in Tijuana, It is traditional Mexican folk music. It's, you know, the acoustic guitars and the upright bass and, you know, all that. And Richie made it, you know...
And a harp.
Right, and a harp. Yeah, a harp. Richie made it rock and roll, the rock and roll version of
So the one we all know.
Right, and of course, if you ask anybody if they ever heard the song of Bamba, they're not going to tell you that they know the old Mexican folk song.
And I thought it was really interesting that Wilson Pickett was touring on it as well. I kind of... Because I love Wilson Pickett. I think Wilson Pickett is incredible. And... but I know him probably more predominantly as a songwriter, because he wrote, like... In the Midnight Hour and tracks like that, right?
Yep.
But I love that Lonely Teardrops. That's one of my favorite. I love that song, and because it's in Leaving Las Vegas with Nick Cage.
Yeah.
But I love the way it starts as well.
Very interesting casting choice on that.
What was going on with that? Because he's not in blackface, is he?
No,
because he looks like he's in blackface.
I believe. Now, this is not something that I've researched. This is just pure speculation. I believe that gentleman is Middle Eastern.
He looked
clearly not.
He looked Indian or Asian. He didn't look
clearly not African.
Right.
African American, or however you want to politically correct say that.
I don't know.
Which Wilson Pickett is.
Right.
Very. It's there's a string that they go along, a string of, we'll just cast whoever's the best actor. It doesn't matter what they look like.
And yet the movie, by calling it La Bamba, the movie should be about the first Mexican rock and roll. Like, that's what it should be.
That's what the marketing for it was. Well, I mean, I'm sure the marketing was, this is like the very short-lived life of a great rock star, Richie Valens.
Right.
You know, the incredible story of this wonderful young talent that his life was ended too soon. I would think they would get a lot more of an audience if they were to say...
Well, today especially. I mean, imagine if you did it today with a proper, Hispanic actor.
Right. You know, this is the first big Hispanic rock and roll star. Right. The story of the world's first big rock and roll star.
Because it's sort of the thing that you never... Like, I've never... First of all, I mean, I don't really understand racism anyway. I really don't get it. But because, like, we're all just people. But the other thing is that... And I was funny enough, I was talking to someone about this the other day, because they obviously, again, racist in the news because, of that absolute tragic shooting, but also obviously the lady who was, tanning herself in order to be there.
She identified as a...
Right. The thing that I've never understood about it is that all the music that we're talking about, that exists today, comes from the African rhythms that came across on the ships, but also the Delta blues and gospel, and all that is the melting pot of then what becomes rock and roll, country, blues, jazz, all that stuff.
All of it.
It all comes from that. It's hilarious. In England, there was a award show called the Music of Black Origin Awards, right? And it always made me laugh. I'm like, apart from clog dancing and classical, what other music isn't? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's polka, right? That's what I mean. Like clog dancing, kind of, Morris dancing, hit sticks and hook, bing, like that's white music.
Yeah.
White music is like fiddly diddly dip, flip dip. You know,
right.
There's no soul to it. There's no rhythm to it. There's no heart to it. There's no beat to it. That all comes out. Yes, it comes out of the tragedy of slavery, and it comes out of that horrible period. But it is, endlessly fascinating and interesting and diverse music. When you think that it's 3 or 4 chords, and the millions of songs that have literally been written with those 3 chords.
Right.
And not only that, but they are the basis, even if you throw in a minor here or a diminished there or an eighth there or whatever it is, they are the basis of almost every other song.
Yeah.
Whether it's the Beatles' most psychedelic song or whatever. It's the base of all that. Or whether it's Lady Gaga or whether it's whoever. It's the base, those 3 chords. You know what I mean? Those keys are defined by, it's key of E or the key of C or the key of whatever. They're defined by those 3 chords. Any musician knows it who plays that kind of stuff. So it's absolutely fascinating to me, and I think that there's definitely more films to be made, looking at that aspect of it. Like, I'm more fascinated about the songwriting and more about, like, how do you even come up with this? And where does this even come from? And how do you take something that was, you know, Delta blues and make it rock and roll? And, like, what happens when you plug in a guitar? And, like, that's what I get excited about. That's what I get fascinated about. What happens when a Mexican decides, okay, well, I'm going to take this, but I'm going to meld our music with this music and see what happens.
Yeah.
Like, that could be a fascinating thing. You know what I mean? So
what they always show in any of these movies, they only, for the most part, they only show the result. They only show Richie Valens goes from obscure teenage kid, Mexican kid in high school to famous to having this big song to dead.
Right.
They don't show the group of people that want nothing to do with him because he's a Mexican teenager.
Right.
Trying to
there's no
play rock and
negatives
roll.
to it. No one's, apart from the dad of Donna, from Donna's dad.
How many people said, I don't want to listen to this? Probably a lot, but they don't show any of that.
Right.
They don't show...
There's the one shitty dude in the band who doesn't want him to be in it, and then there's Bob, who...
Well, it's the Bob show.
Poor Bob.
Right. Yeah,
Poor Bob.
but it has nothing to do with the music. It has everything to do with how come you get all the advantages in life and I don't.
But he got his art, but just never chose to pursue it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's like...
He won $500 worth of art lessons.
Yeah.
He could have done that, and then he could have started sending stuff off to the studios or, you know, posting stuff in galleries or whatever it was. There was opportunities. He never took any of them.
Exactly. So, but they never show like the negative aspects of any of these things. Whether it's Elvis or whether it's Richie Valens or whether it's Jimi Hendrix, or it doesn't matter who it is.
It's all self-imposed, like with the Johnny Cash story or with the Ray Charles story.
Right.
There's a little bit of the race thing in the Ray Charles story, but
it's not to the point where you're like, wow. You could look at any of these movies and you can say to yourself, wow, I'm really rooting for this guy now because now I know the things that happened to this person.
Right.
At no point out of Bamba or Elvis or so many of these other biopics do I say to myself, wow, I can't believe that this happened to that person. Now I'm an even bigger fan of them because I know the adversities they went through.
Right.
For the most part, especially in more modern times, we already know people's backgrounds because they kind of put it in your face. You know, everything is documented now. We know everything there is to know. Why I like movies like La Bamba is because there wasn't a lot documented back then, so it's either first-hand accounts or whatever happened to be recorded at that time, whether it's a video or audio. So that's all we have to go by.
And not only that, but it's a film that 30 years after the incidents take place, the song and the person, no matter how short his life was, still relevant enough, maybe even more relevant at that point, that they got together and made the movie about it. I mean, if nothing else, to make a snapshot of 3-4 years in someone's life, making what essentially is 2 or 3 songs, only one of which really gets any play now. I mean, I knew Donna and the other one, Come On, Let's Go. Come On, Let's Go. I knew that, but
not really.
Was the one.
Right. If you were to ask someone, have you ever heard Richie Valens' music before? Most young people would say no.
Right.
And the few people that did know what you're talking about would know La Bamba over Donna or Come On, Let's Go.
And what's incredible is, considering it's such a short life, well, like I say, when you look at the credits of the movie, there's about 7 or 8 songs in there that he wrote.
Yeah.
And that was just the beginning.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, in fact, I wasn't even sure that I knew that La Bamba was a folk song before it was his rock and roll song.
See, that's the beauty of watching movies like this, especially at a young age, is you're so oblivious to music and how the world works and all that kind of stuff. But the first time you watch this movie, you learn so much about how this person's life would have worked and how this person's life did work and how it should have ended up.
Right.
But you also learn a little bit about the history of that period of music.
That's always my favorite
thing.
They
do feature a whole bunch of different acts. Like when they're on that Alan Freed show in Philadelphia, they do feature, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 different music groups where they play, 30, 40 seconds worth of songs.
Well, this was the incredible thing, is back in the day, you could go on the Sun Records, when they took them on tour, you could go see a gig that would have Elvis, Jerry Lewis, Johnny Cash, all these people together, you'd be like, this is insane.
Yeah.
It would be like literally putting together the biggest people in music today.
But you'd have to have 12 of them.
And not for a charity gig, but
Right.
just for a regular gig.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, McCartney and and whoever else, and Tony Bennett, whatever, I don't know. Put together whoever the big people are today, Lady Gaga, Adele,
Definitely Tony Bennett.
whatever. Well, no, because he's touring with Lady Gaga at the moment.
Which is
so-
weird.
It is, but
Very weird.
my friend Paulie is playing the drums for him and has been all around the world with him.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not kidding.
Well, good on him. It just seems very strange.
Paulie fucking Francis, his name is. He plays the drums for Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett. But I mean Tony Bennett only because he's the last of the big crooners. If you're going to put together like something, I don't know, Dylan.
It would be a shit show. If you put Dylan and Frank Sinatra, not Frank Sinatra,
Tony
Bennett, you put Bob Dylan and Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga and I don't know.
Adele, McCartney,
Keith Richards, and I don't know.
Bieber.
You put a bunch of random people together.
Who are the hip hop artists and rap artists? I don't even know all those guys.
Like Jay-Z or somebody.
Right.
You try to mix in like all these big names, and you're like, this doesn't work.
Right.
Just going back to Elvis and going back to Richie Valens. Those guys, they weren't afforded the luxury of being an idea. Now we can say that Elvis was more of an idea than he was a human being towards the end of his career.
Right.
People held Elvis in such high regard, not unlike the Beatles and anybody else that gets to a certain point of success
Right.
in the music industry, especially. Like, they hold this. Forget about Jesus. We've got Elvis. We put our faith in Elvis.
Are you saying Elvis is bigger than Jesus?
I didn't say that. The Beatles might have. I didn't.
The Beatles said they were bigger.
Right.
And actually, they didn't even say that. They said that they were having a bigger impact on the youth of today than religion was, is what they meant to say. And John Lennon just went, oh yeah, we're bigger than Jesus. and then that was misquoted, and then people were burning their records. As Eric Idle humorously says in the Ruttles, they were buying them just to burn.
Just to burn them, yeah.
Which is hilarious.
Which makes sense. I bet you that happened too.
Oh, I bet you it did. I bet you it did. Redneck spending like $20, $50 on like lots of Beatles records and then burning them.
Watch this. Watch me spite these guys. Take that, you jerks.
Well, that's the other thing about the music. Like, to give them money, you don't even have to listen or like them. You just buy the product.
Yeah.
And then that's it.
It doesn't make a difference.
No.
That's so good.
At least if you go to the cinema, you have to sit and watch the movie. Well, you don't. I mean, you could just buy the ticket and piss off. But,
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that goes along with the record industry and in cinema and television and everything else is the ad revenue and advertisement and all that kind of stuff. The marketing behind all that stuff. That's what ruins a good product. Like, you have a genuinely talented person, and I've said this on my show before, and I'll bring it up again, is like a guy like Bruno Mars. Everybody likes Bruno Mars for the most part.
I wouldn't be able to hum one of his songs if
It's hard not to like for the people that do know who Bruno Mars is.
Right.
It's hard not to like Bruno Mars.
I know the name.
Right, there you go.
I couldn't pick him out of a lineup.
That's all you really need. You know his name. And it's not because he's Madonna, he's the idea of what the record industry thinks that you want. He is legitimately talented. He is another Richie Valens.
Right.
He lives in modern day where the record company can recognize the hard work and talent from this guy, which Bruno Mars used to, as a child, like a small child, used to do this Elvis impersonation, and that's how he started getting some recognition. Like, look at this little kid belting out these Elvis songs.
Oh, okay.
So it all kind of ties in. But he now is the Richie Valens, meaning that he is pure talent.
Right.
He doesn't need auto-tune. He doesn't need,
a big hat.
He doesn't need a big hat. He doesn't need any of these, ridiculous stage shows. Are there elements to that, to his live performances? I'm sure there is. I'm sure there. That's again,
that's
we're
performance
2015.
versus marketing. That's different.
Right. But here's the thing: is that we live in an age now where the record company can identify this is a raw talent. We can sell this.
Right.
And they can put money behind it, and they can put advertisement behind it, and they can put
Matt Farley. They should put Matt Farley out there.
They should do that. But they can do all that now. Back then it was let's put it on the radio and we'll pay the radio stations a bunch of money, and they'll play it once every half hour, and that's how people will know it's popular. Yeah. Nowadays they don't necessarily do that. Radio is a dying medium.
But they do flog it, like Matt Farley does say on his podcast. It's like the only reason we know and like this stuff is because it's repeated and repeated and repeated.
But it's not just repeated on the radio like it was. It's put in movies. It's put on television commercials.
Yeah, it's put in shopping malls.
Right. It's put everywhere. They put it everywhere that you are going to be, everywhere that you could possibly be. It's all over your websites. It's all over banner ads everywhere. It's everywhere that you could be. Anywhere that a person could hear or see something, that's where they're going to put it.
Right.
Richard Valens didn't have that luxury.
No.
It was either you were good or you weren't good, and people bought it because it was good, and you heard it on the radio and you liked it, or it got stuck in your head and you're like, I guess I kind of like this.
Yeah.
But if you didn't like it, you didn't go out and buy it.
Because I hear songs now, and people go, oh, this is so-and-so, this is Rihanna or someone. And I'm like, wasn't this on a jeans advert?
Yeah.
And that's how I know it. I don't know Rihanna. I don't know what she looks like. Wouldn't know if I fell over on the street what she sounds like. I don't know any of her other songs or whatever. I don't even know if one of her songs has been used for a jean advert. I'm just using it as an example. I know the name because it's a brand, because it's one name, because it's like Madonna or it's like Elvis or it's like whatever. And I know that, people go, oh, this is Beyonce. And I'm like, I know what Beyonce looks like. I know that she was in a band before she was solo. If I hear it, I don't know Beyonce. I seriously don't. I know people go, oh, how is that possible? I go, I couldn't tell you which was Beyonce, which was Rihanna, which was Selena Gomez. Like, I wouldn't, to me, it's all the same.
It's just pop music.
Stuff.
Yeah, it's
and I don't know, but people go, oh, this is great, I love this. This is by whoever. And I'm like, how do you know? I don't. Because I didn't keep up with it. I listen, like, the music, I'm listening to the Mountain Goats. Like, that's what I listen to, which is like, they're still making music, they're still putting out albums, but they're a band that's been around since the 90s. It's not a...
Yeah, but I'm sure the Mountain Goats, which I do know the Mountain Goats, or a band like the Mountain Goats, they don't have anything behind them other than the music.
Right.
The talent, regardless of how you perceive that talent, whether you think they're the greatest band or the worst band, that's all they have is how you perceive their talent.
Right.
It's just 3 or 4 guys that play instruments.
Yeah. Sometimes just one guy.
Sometimes just one guy on a piano, right?
Right, because it's John Darnielle, and then the other 2 guys, they do play with him. But he, like, John Darnielle, like, is the Mountain Goats, and then the other 2 guys who do play with him predominantly, but they're like his backup.
So it's just his talent level and how you perceive his talent level.
Right.
There's no marketing behind that. I'm sure there's a little bit. He's on a record label, so there has to be some. But it's on how you perceive that music. It's not pop music where it's a DJ playing something through his computer and it's someone singing with auto-tune on top of that.
Right.
And you're being told that this is the new big great thing.
Right. And I think the reason why that stuff doesn't have an impact on me where it might have impact on other people, for me, repetition actually bothers me. Repetition actually affects me. If I go into a shopping mall, a movie, and a commercial, and I hear the same song over and over again, it drives me nuts. I'm like, that song, what was that happy song or whatever it was? I want to kill every time that song comes on. I want to find someone and strangle the life out of them. Anyone who's clapping or whatever, I just want to just kill them. I'm so enraged by that song. The last thing it does is make me happy. Yeah. That Gangnam Style thing.
That was annoying.
Whoever likes that song, I just want them to be set fire to. I just can't. No, I'm kidding. I don't really. I'm psychotic, Jay. No, but what I mean is that any kind of repetition like that, it's the same when, like, Hit Me Baby One More Time came out, or whatever it is. I'm like, okay, the video comes on, I'm like, oh, right, great, so you're selling it where you should be wanting to fuck a 14-year-old. Okay, that's disgusting and I'm not interested. Goodbye, boom. Right. But that song played everywhere. And you're just like, I hate it. So to me, the repetition of stuff that Matt Farley talks about, and you're talking about, the like sell stuff, that only pushes me away. That only makes me like.
And here's the thing.
No interest in it. I need constantly new stimuli.
Yeah,
I can't have.
Well, the rebellious punk rock teenager in me says the same exact thing. I don't want to hear the same repetitious And
I'm not trying to be different for the sake of being different. It's just the way I'm built.
Yeah, I don't want to hear electronic dance music. That doesn't speak to me. It's the same beat over and over again, and then they drop the beat, and then they change the pitch here and there. And,
right.
But it's all the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Most of those songs don't even have a lyric.
Right.
Not a lyric, let alone lyrics.
Right.
That doesn't speak to me. That when I hear that, and we talked about this last night, that warm fuzzy feeling you get when I hear an Elvis song. I don't get that when I listen to electronic dance music. I don't
Not
get
at all.
When I hear pop music, when I hear
Like
these
I
things
said,
that are being
in the
sold.
American trilogy, when the brass band goes bam, bam, bam. The hair's done it again.
Yeah.
The hair on the back of my neck goes up. My skin starts to hum. And all I did was just say 3 notes. That's what it should always be.
Right.
It should always be that.
If you've ever been to a live concert and you've seen a band that maybe you've been into for a while and you're like, I finally got tickets to go see this band live, and you see them, if you don't get that spine-tingling sensation, you're doing music wrong.
Yeah.
You're doing it wrong because you're not emotionally invested into the music. You're just hearing it because it's pleasant to your ears.
Right.
It's just filler at that point.
Right.
You're not, you don't have to, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on concert tickets just to feel that. However, if you're going to spend money on a concert ticket, make it on something that really speaks to you. Make it, if you're so invested into the song, whether it's because of the lyrics or the music or as a whole, or you really like the melody, whatever it happens to be, you should get that feeling. You should, if you actually enjoy music, you should get that warm, fuzzy, spine-tingling sensation.
And to tie it back and to wrap it up and put a neat bow on it, that's exactly what the youth felt when rock and roll first came into being. Because the first time they heard those 3 chords through an electrical amp with a couple of backing singers and a guy smacking the hell out of a tom on a drum kit, everyone got up and they had to dance. Like new dances were invented every single day because you literally could not keep your body from humming when the music was playing.
Yeah.
You literally couldn't.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to be high on drugs, you didn't have to be drunk, you didn't have to have any, it wasn't like, the reason why I say that, it wasn't like the dance craze of like the 90s with happy hardcore and all that.
No.
You had to be high on acid to enjoy that music because it was just repetitive, and it's not fun to sat here. So, but with that, it's been fascinating to talk to you. So I'm so glad that these 2 movies have brought out the music geek in both of us.
Yeah.
I'm really happy about that.
I want to thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
Dude, it's been a thrill. I knew it would be. We had a great chat when I was on your show. We had a great night last night, so I knew today was going to be fun. Yeah. And it's fantastic. Thanks so much.
So there you have it. That was the great meeting of the musical minds between myself and Jay Mayo. Now, you may remember, Jay, when we did Troma's War, when we were sat under the glorious New Hampshire sun and eating sausages made out of things like boar and elk, discussing Troma's War. That episode was actually, believe it or not, recorded after this episode. However, when we were up in New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Maine and so on, you might remember from that episode that Jay and I did some music. So let's leave you now with a track from the 5-song strong New England EP that is available over at miscplumbingfixtures.bandcamp.com. That's MISC plumbingfixtures.bandcamp.com. Leaving you with one of those songs now, and we will be back next week with more In the Diner movies.
Linda, are you good? Call me Linda one more time.
I'm sorry, Jay. Take my hand. There's bluebells growing on the verge. Oh, this sweet
got our back. I'll go see it with you if you get the urge. Our lady, take my heart. We're living in lavender and drinking mulled wine. Cuddle closer as the sun spreads its wings. Oh, this is the best summer and we are doing fine. Till we're old and fat, old and gray, you and me. No matter what you say, we'll live to fight another day. Just one more day, all the way. Oh, lady, take my hand. Everything's coming up roses. We are dancing around the kitchen, having water fights up on the roof. Up the mountain by the sea, I'll always want you next to me. Your auburn hair against the cartoon blue sky. Funny pictures in a photo booth remind us when we're old and fat, old and gray, you and me. No matter what you say, we'll live to fight another day. Just one more day, all the way. Oh, lady, take my hand. Oh, lady, take my heart. Oh, lady, take my head. It was yours from the start. Dip, dip, ba-dip-ba-dip-dip.